I've lived alone long enough to distinguish between the settling creaks of an old house and the sounds that scream something is terribly wrong. After 11 years in my cabin on the edge of Bend, Oregon, I knew every whisper of this place, like the breathing of someone you love. So, when the frantic knocking started at 4:02 a.m., I was already sitting up before I was fully awake. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the pipes, it was a desperate, uneven pounding, carrying a weight that chilled me to the bone. Outside, the temperature had plummeted to 19 degrees Fahrenheit, and the snow that had been falling since sundown pressed against the windows in a thick, muffled silence. I'm 62, a retired insurance investigator, a polite way of saying I was paid to notice what others missed. I'd learned early that the middle of the night brings two kinds of visitors, the lost and the desperate. This was the second kind. I pulled on my boots, unlaced, and crossed the living room in the dark. My hand found the porch light switch out of habit. The deadbolt clicked, the handle turned, and I opened the door. The cold hit me first, a brutal wall of it. Then I saw her. My daughter Kayla stood on the porch, snow up to her shins. She was 29, and she had walked through a frozen pine forest in the dark to get to my door. Her lips were the color of a deep bruise. Her hands shook so violently she couldn't hold them still. She wore a thin blouse, meant for a dinner party, not a November storm. No coat, no gloves. Her hair was matted with melting snow, and her eyes, when they finally met mine, held the blankness of someone who had burned through every last reserve just to make it this far. I didn't ask questions. I pulled her inside. The investigator and the father in me moved as one. I sat her on the couch closest to the propane heater and wrapped her in wool blankets. Her feet, soaked through her shoes, were icy. Her skin was profoundly cold, the kind that settles deep into the tissue. I grabbed my phone and called 911, talking to Kayla the whole time. "You're safe. You're inside. The heater's on. I'm right here." I gave the dispatcher my address, reported severe cold exposure, and requested an ambulance. Then I put the phone on speaker and went to the kitchen. I filled a mug with warm water, not hot. 30 years of accident reports taught me that warming someone too fast after extreme cold can send them into shock. Warm and slow. I brought the mug back, wrapping her hands around it, keeping my own hands over hers until I felt her grip tighten slightly. That was something. Her body was still fighting. The dispatcher asked questions, and I answered without looking away from Kayla. Breathing? Yes. Responsive? Partially. Frostbite? I checked her feet. The skin was pale and waxy where it should have been pink. I covered them back up, tucking the blanket tighter. The ambulance would be 12 minutes out. Understood, I said, my hands moving, my voice steady, watching her face for color to return. It was when I was checking her hands for circulation that I saw them. I know what cold does to skin, and what branches do when you push through underbrush in the dark. Kayla had those marks. Scraped palms, a long shallow cut on her left forearm, consistent with a branch strike. But there were other marks, older ones, faded at the edges. Marks on the inside of her wrists and along the backs of her hands that had nothing to do with pine trees or frozen ground. They hadn't happened tonight. They had happened before tonight, more than once, with enough time in between for the skin to start the long process of trying to forget. I looked at them for a long moment. The heater clicked on. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the thin wail of a siren. My daughter stared at the ceiling with those empty eyes. I pulled the blanket tighter around her without a word. 30 years of investigating taught me that the moment you think you're looking at the beginning of a story is almost never the actual beginning. There is always something that came before, a chain of small decisions, small silences, small surrenders that nobody thought to document until the night someone ended up on a porch in the snow. I had found the end of that chain. Now I needed to find where it started. She told me the story in pieces over the next hour, while the ambulance was on its way and the heater fought the cold. I sat beside her, listening the way I had trained myself to listen over 3 decades of pulling truth out of situations that didn't want to give it up. Without interrupting, without reacting, just taking it in, filing it, letting the picture build itself one detail at a time. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, sitting still and listening to my daughter tell me where she had been. Her husband, Beckett had always been intense, controlling, some might say. But Kayla loved him, or at least I thought she did. She'd stopped calling as often, stopped visiting. When she did, she seemed smaller, quieter. I dismissed it as the natural progression of a young couple finding their own way. My investigator's instinct, dulled by a father's hope, had failed me. Kayla recounted a pattern of escalating control. Her phone locked, her car keys often misplaced, her bank accounts monitored. He'd isolated her, subtly at first, then overtly. Tonight, it had been an argument about her wanting to visit me. He'd locked her out, taken her coat and shoes, and told her to think about it in the cold. She'd walked for over 2 kilometers, through the dark, frozen woods, to my cabin. The paramedics arrived, a flurry of efficient calm. They assessed Kayla, started an IV, and gently moved her to the ambulance. As they wheeled her past me, her eyes, though still tired, held a flicker of something new, a spark of resolve. I watched the ambulance lights disappear down the snowy road, then turned back to my empty, suddenly too quiet cabin. The silence felt different now, heavier. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about getting Kayla warm. It was about getting her free. And I knew exactly how Beckett operated. He'd twist the narrative, play the victim, blame me, the overbearing father-in-law. I needed proof. The next morning, after Kayla was stable in the hospital, I started my own investigation. I couldn't go to her house. That would alert Beckett. But I had my contacts. I called Nadine, a former colleague from my insurance days, now a private investigator. She was meticulous, discreet, and owed me a favor. I asked her to look into Beckett's finances, his digital footprint, anything that might reveal a pattern of coercive control. 2 days later, the police called. Beckett had filed a complaint. He claimed I was harassing him, that I had kidnapped Kayla, and that her appearance at my door was a staged event to discredit him. Just as I predicted, Officer Daltrey, a no-nonsense woman I knew from previous cases, listened patiently to my side. I told her about the marks on Kayla's wrists, the pattern of isolation, the sudden appearance at my door in sub-zero temperatures. Daltrey said she'd investigate, but warned me that without direct evidence, it would be difficult. Nadine's findings started trickling in. Beckett had a history of financial irregularities, small-time scams, and a previous restraining order from an ex-girlfriend for emotional abuse and harassment. He'd also been quietly draining Kayla's separate savings account, a detail I knew she'd kept secret from him. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a disturbing picture of a man who systematically controlled and exploited those around him. A week later, I visited Kayla in the hospital. She was physically recovering, but emotionally fragile. She admitted she'd been too ashamed to tell me about Beckett's abuse. The marks on her wrists, she confessed, were from him restraining her during arguments. The fear in her eyes was palpable. I told her about Nadine's findings, about Beckett's complaint to the police. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "He's going to try to take everything," she whispered. "Not if we don't let him," I replied. "We need more. Something undeniable." That evening, I got a call from Silas, a young tech whiz I'd helped out years ago. He'd been working for Nadine. He'd managed to recover deleted files from an old laptop Beckett had recently donated to a local charity. Among them were encrypted messages, audio recordings, and even a few short video clips. Silas had managed to decrypt them. "It's not pretty, Warren," he said, his voice grim. "This guy's a monster." The next morning, Officer Daltrey called. Beckett had escalated. He'd obtained a temporary restraining order against me, citing threats and harassment. He was trying to cut off my access to Kayla. This was his decisive move. He thought he had me cornered. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I called Daltrey back. "Officer, I have something you need to see. Something that will change everything." I met Daltrey and a representative from Adult Protective Services, Agnes Whitfield, at my cabin. Agnes, a veteran of 22 years in APS, had a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. She'd already visited Beckett's house after Daltrey's initial report and noted the combination lock on Kayla's prescription bottle and the surveillance cameras pointed at the doors. I sat them down and played the recovered files. The first audio clip was Beckett's voice, cold and menacing, telling Kayla she was worthless and lucky to have him. Then came the messages, detailing his control over her finances, her movements, her very thoughts. Finally, a short video clip, shaky and dark, showing Beckett physically restraining Kayla, the struggle evident in her muffled cries. The older marks on her wrists, the ones I'd seen, were clearly visible. Daltrey and Agnes watched in stunned silence. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of the truth. When the last clip ended, Agnes looked at me, her expression unreadable. "This," she said, her voice quiet, "is a complete picture of coercive control." Just then, my front door burst open. Beckett stood there, framed by the snowy landscape, his face contorted in rage. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his eyes darting from Daltrey to Agnes, then to the laptop on my coffee table. "You're violating the restraining order, old man. I'm calling the police." Daltrey stepped forward, her hand resting on her sidearm. "Mr. Thorne, you're already speaking with the police and Adult Protective Services. I suggest you calm down." Beckett's eyes landed on the laptop. He saw the screen, still displaying a paused frame from the video. His face went ashen. That's doctored. He's trying to frame me," he shouted, lunging for the laptop. I moved instinctively, pushing the coffee table back. Beckett stumbled, crashing into a small side table, sending a vase of flowers shattering to the floor. The cold air rushed in from the open door. I felt a sharp pain in my side as I fell, hitting the base of the stairs. Then, Kayla appeared at the top of the staircase. She was wearing the gray sweatshirt she'd worn to bed, her bandaged hands at her sides. She looked down at the scene below, Beckett standing amidst broken glass, cold air swirling, and me on the floor, one hand pressed against my ribs. I watched her face. For 2 months, I'd seen a particular restraint in her, a careful blankness. It wasn't there now. She looked at Beckett with a clear, direct focus. She didn't look away. She didn't lower her eyes. "Did I see you now?" she said, her voice quiet and entirely steady. "I finally see you." Beckett turned toward the sound of her voice. Whatever he had come here to say seemed to leave him entirely. He stood there in the wreckage, the cold pouring in, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked like a man who had run out of performance. Officer Daltrey came through the front door 40 seconds later. Paramedics confirmed 2 cracked ribs on my right side and helped me onto a gurney. Every breath was a distinct, sharp event. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I turned my head. Kayla stood outside, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. She stood at her full height, shoulders level, chin up, not performing composure, but simply occupying it, the way she used to when she was young. Every breath was a blade, but I smiled at her anyway. The ceiling of room 114 at St. Charles Medical Center was acoustic tile, off-white with a small water stain. I'd been studying it for 40 minutes by the time the winter light outside brightened to morning. Breathing was a managed process. 2 cracked ribs, no pneumothorax, no displaced fractures. "Fortunate," the physician had said. Kayla was in the chair beside the window, already dressed, her bandaged hands folded in her lap. We'd spoken briefly. She was all right. She'd slept. She didn't want me to apologize. I told her I wasn't going to. She almost smiled. At 8:47, Agnes Whitfield came in without knocking. No clipboard. That absence registered before anything else. Without it, she looked like a different version of herself, one who had decided to arrive today without the official apparatus. She pulled a chair to the side of the bed. "I won't take long," Agnes said, looking at me, then at Kayla, then back at me. "I wanted to come in person." She explained her 22 years at Adult Protective Services, the countless cases of controlled living situations she'd recognized. She had revisited Beckett's residence. The medicine cabinet in the primary bathroom contained a controlled anxiolytic prescription issued in Kayla's name. The bottle had a combination lock affixed to its cap, an aftermarket device available online. The surveillance cameras pointed at the doors, the restricted access to her phone and car. It was all there. Beckett was arrested that morning. The evidence, combined with Kayla's testimony, was overwhelming. The charges were serious: domestic violence, coercive control, and financial exploitation. It wasn't an easy road, but it was a necessary one. Months later, in May, I sat in my garden, the sun warm on my face. Kayla was inside, the smell of coffee drifting out. She called my name, not for anything specific, just the sound of it, the way you call someone when you want them to come in for coffee, when breakfast is almost ready. The house was no longer quiet in the way it had been for 11 years. It was full, in the small and sufficient way that houses become full when the people inside them have finally stopped waiting and started living. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't have articulated when this all began. I waited too long. I saw the signs in September and told myself I needed more time, more evidence, more certainty. What I actually needed was courage, the willingness to step forward before everything was perfect, before the case was airtight. If you are watching someone you love disappear one quiet degree at a time, do not make my mistake. Do not wait until the damage is complete. Say something. Show up. The cost of waiting is always paid by the person you are trying to protect. Every story worth telling carries the same lesson underneath it. Love is not a feeling you hold privately. It is a decision you make out loud, in the cold, at great personal cost, when it would be easier to stay inside. This was a family story that required every person in it to choose, more than once, whether to act or to look away. Nadine chose to come forward despite everything she stood to lose. Silas chose to carry a box downtown instead of keeping his curtains closed. Kayla chose to walk through a frozen forest toward a light she wasn't certain was real. These are not dramatic gestures. They are ordinary human decisions made under pressure, and they are the only things that ever truly change anything. I am not a man who speaks about faith easily, but I believe, as my late wife Ruth believed, that something larger than coincidence places the right people beside us at the right moment. In the middle of that November, when I had no truck, no watch, and nothing but a USB drive and a daughter who had nearly been lost entirely, I felt that presence. Call it what you will. I call it grace, and I am grateful for it. The people worth protecting are always worth the cost. That does not change with time. It only becomes clearer.